The click of Susan Hill's heels echoed through the empty streets of Tempe as she walked home from the library that night in 1982. Streetlights cast long shadows across the historic district's sidewalks. She adjusted her bag, quickening her pace slightly as the cool Arizona night air brushed against her skin. Unknown to Susan, a pair of eyes tracked her movement from the darkness. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. For 37 years, the streets of Tempe held a secret that would haunt this community. A woman vanished without a trace, leaving behind questions that seemed destined to remain unanswered forever. But in 2019, breakthrough DNA technology finally revealed what no one could have imagined. The monster wasn't hiding in some distant city. He wasn't locked away in prison for another crime. He was a respected school principal, a trusted community leader who walked these same streets, attended the same events, and looked into the eyes of those who never stopped searching for Susan. Before we dive deeper into this shocking case that rocked Arizona to its core, hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from today. Trust me, this is one story you won't believe until the very end. Susan Hill wasn't just a librarian at the Tempe Public Library, she was the heart of it. At 34, she had established herself as the person who could find any book, recommend the perfect read, and remember every regular patron by name. Her colleagues described her as meticulous, yet warm, with a quiet confidence that made everyone feel welcome. Born and raised in Phoenix, Susan had moved to Tempe after earning her master's degree in library science from the University of Arizona in 1975. She fell in love with Tempe's historic district, with its blend of Victorian architecture and desert charm. Her small bungalow on Maple Avenue sat just 6 blocks from the library, a pleasant walk she made twice daily, often stopping to chat with neighbors or admire the desert flowers that somehow thrived in the harsh Arizona climate. Susan's life in 1982. Tempe was comfortable and purposeful. She woke each morning at 6 a.m., enjoyed her coffee on the porch while reading, and walked to work by 8:30. Her evenings often included community book clubs she organized, volunteer work with adult literacy programs, or quiet dinners with her small circle of close friends. Unmarried but happily independent, Susan had recently started talking about her dream to one day open a specialized bookshop focusing on Southwestern literature and history. The Tempe of 1982 was a city in transition. The sleepy college town was growing alongside Arizona State University, but still maintained its small-town feel. The historic district where Susan lived featured tree-lined streets with homes dating back to the early 1900s, local businesses where owners knew customers by name, and community events that brought neighbors together despite the scorching summer heat that regularly topped 110 degrees. It was a time before cell phones and social media, when people relied on landlines and face-to-face interactions. Susan's rotary phone and answering machine sat on a small table in her hallway. Her calendar hung in the kitchen, meticulously noting library events, friends' birthdays, and community meetings. A new Sony Walkman, a splurge she'd treated herself to for her birthday, sat on her nightstand next to a stack of cassette tapes featuring Fleetwood Mac, The Police, and Joan Baez. In this desert community, Susan had built a life rich with purpose and connection. Her colleagues at the library valued her dedication to expanding their children's reading program. Local teachers appreciated her enthusiasm when classes visited. Parents trusted her recommendations for their reluctant readers. Susan Hill wasn't just existing in Tempe, she was woven into its fabric, making her sudden disappearance all the more incomprehensible to those who knew her. Tuesday, October 5, 1982, began like any other autumn day for Susan Hill. She arrived at the Tempe Public Library at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before opening, carrying a thermos of coffee and a bag containing her lunch, a turkey sandwich, an apple, and homemade oatmeal cookies she'd baked the previous evening. Co-workers later recalled that Susan seemed entirely normal that day. She led the morning children's story time, helped a graduate student locate research materials, and spent the afternoon cataloguing a new shipment of books. At 5:30 p.m., she mentioned to the head librarian, Margaret Winters, that she planned to walk home and prepare for the book club meeting scheduled for the following evening. Security footage from a nearby bank grainy by today's standards but a valuable piece of evidence, captured Susan leaving the library at 5:42 p.m. She wore a light blue blouse, navy skirt, and carried her distinctive brown leather messenger bag. The October evening was pleasant by Arizona standards, around 75 degrees, with the sun beginning its descent. Susan's typical route home took her east on 5th Street, then south on Ash Avenue, before turning onto Maple where her bungalow stood. This path wound through both commercial and residential areas of the historic district, past the old courthouse, several small businesses and rows of well-maintained homes. The walk typically took her about 20 minutes. When Susan didn't arrive for her Wednesday morning shift, Margaret called her home. After receiving no answer, she contacted Susan's closest friend, Diane Reynolds. Diane, who had a spare key, went to Susan's house during her lunch break and found it undisturbed. Susan's bed was made, no dishes in the sink, no signs of her return the previous evening. Her Walkman still sat on the nightstand. Most tellingly, her cat's food bowl was empty, something the meticulous Susan would never have allowed had she come home. By 2 p.m. on Wednesday, October 6th, Diane and Margaret filed a missing persons report with the Tempe Police Department. Officer James Cortez took the initial report, noting that adults had the right to disappear, but acknowledging the circumstances seemed concerning given Susan's reliability and routine. Word spread quickly through Tempe's close-knit community. By Wednesday evening, volunteers had organized to retrace Susan's walking route, checking alleys, vacant lots, and dumpsters. The local newspaper ran a front-page story in Thursday's edition, featuring Susan's photo and details of her disappearance. The first 48 hours saw a community mobilized in fear and determination. ASU students joined local residents in distributing flyers, featuring Susan's image and description. Local businesses offered their premises as coordination centers. The library became an impromptu headquarters, with a map of Tempe spread across a table, areas marked off as they were searched. Detective Raymond Walsh was assigned to the case Thursday morning. His first actions included interviewing library staff, patrons who had interacted with Susan on Tuesday, and residents along her walking route. By Friday afternoon, police had expanded their search to include nearby Papago Park and the dry riverbed of the Salt River. Divers checked the few water-filled canals in the area. As the weekend approached with no sign of Susan, a terrible realization settled over Tempe. This wasn't a misunderstanding or brief disappearance. Something was deeply wrong. Susan Hill had vanished into the warm Arizona evening, leaving no trace behind. Detective Raymond Walsh had been with the Tempe Police Department for 15 years when Susan Hill's case landed on his desk. At 43, Walsh had handled everything from petty theft to armed robbery, but missing persons cases always affected him differently. They were puzzles without all the pieces, and sometimes without even knowing what the final picture should look like. Walsh's methodical approach began with establishing a detailed timeline. Security footage showed Susan leaving the library at 5:42 p.m. A receipt found in her desk confirmed she had stopped at Jacobson's pharmacy 2 days earlier to pick up allergy medication. Her last bank transaction was a withdrawal of $40 on Monday afternoon. Her last phone call, according to phone records, was to her sister in Tucson on Sunday evening. The detective's first potential lead came from Martin Greaves, owner of the corner market on Ash Avenue, who remembered seeing Susan walk past his store around sunset on Tuesday. This would place her approximately halfway home. No confirmed sightings existed beyond this point. Early suspects included Susan's ex-boyfriend, Thomas Harrington, who had moved to Phoenix following their breakup 8 months prior. Investigation revealed he was on a business trip in San Diego when Susan disappeared, with multiple witnesses confirming his presence at a conference. Another person of interest, library patron Ronald Jeffries, had been banned from the facility after making inappropriate comments to female staff. However, he was in county jail on an unrelated public intoxication charge the night Susan vanished. Walsh and his team collected what little physical evidence existed. Susan's hairbrush and toothbrush provided DNA samples. Fingerprints were lifted from her home and workplace. Soil samples were taken from the areas surrounding her typical route home. A single earring, possibly matching a pair Susan wore frequently, was found near the intersection of Ash and Maple, but it couldn't be conclusively identified as hers. Witness statements proved frustratingly vague. A professor walking his dog reported seeing a dark-colored sedan driving slowly through the neighborhood around 6:15 p.m., but couldn't recall the make or model. An elderly woman living on Maple Avenue thought she heard a brief shout or exclamation around 6:30 p.m., but had dismissed it at the time as neighborhood children playing. By the 2-week mark, Walsh faced mounting pressure and diminishing leads. The FBI provided consultation, but determined there was insufficient evidence to suggest Susan had crossed state lines, keeping the investigation primarily local. Searches expanded to include abandoned properties within a 5-mile radius. Divers rechecked waterways. Cadaver dogs searched desert areas outside town. One of the most promising yet ultimately disappointing leads came when a library patron reported seeing Susan talking to a well-dressed man in his 40s shortly before closing time on Tuesday. Security footage confirmed this interaction, but the man was identified as a university administrator returning books, with multiple alibis for the evening hours. Walsh's investigation hit its most significant roadblock when physical evidence simply ran out. Without a crime scene, without witnesses to an abduction, without ransom demands or any communication, the case existed in a vacuum. Susan's bank account remained untouched, her credit cards unused, her passport sat in her dresser drawer. It was as if she had simply vanished into the warm Arizona air. By December 1982, the active investigation began to cool. Walsh continued to follow up on occasional tips, but substantial leads had dried up. The detective kept Susan's photo on his desk for years afterward, a quiet reminder of the case he couldn't solve. What do you think happened to Susan based on these initial clues? Was she targeted specifically, or was she the victim of a random crime of opportunity? And how could someone disappear so completely on a familiar route through a close-knit community? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The disappearance of Susan Hill transformed Tempe from a relaxed college town into a community gripped by fear and determination. Within days, volunteer search parties swelled to hundreds of participants. Local businesses donated supplies, water bottles, flashlights, walkie-talkies, while restaurants provided meals for exhausted searchers. The public library, where Susan had worked, became command central for civilian efforts, with librarians maintaining meticulous records of areas covered and leads reported. Media coverage escalated quickly from local to regional. The Arizona Republic ran daily updates during the first 2 weeks. Local television stations led their evening broadcasts with the latest developments or lack thereof. By late October, Susan's story had reached national attention, with a brief segment on NBC's nightly news and a feature in USA Today. Her photograph, showing her warm smile and distinctive round glasses, became instantly recognizable throughout the Southwest. The case fundamentally altered daily life in Tempe. Parents began driving children to school rather than allowing them to walk. The university implemented an expanded escort service for students studying late. Local hardware stores reported selling out of deadbolts and window locks. Neighborhood watch programs formed in areas where neighbors had previously barely known each other's names. The carefree atmosphere of the college town had been replaced by vigilance and suspicion. No one felt the impact more deeply than Susan's family. Her parents, retired teachers living in Scottsdale, and her younger sister from Tucson relocated temporarily to Tempe. They established the Find Susan Hill Foundation, raising funds for private investigators when police resources inevitably shifted to newer cases. They appeared at community events, council meetings, and media interviews, refusing to let their daughter become yesterday's news. On the 1-year anniversary of Susan's disappearance, her family organized a candlelight vigil that drew over 500 people to the library courtyard. Her father, Michael Hill, his voice breaking with emotion, told the crowd, "We don't know where Susan is, but we know where she isn't. She isn't forgotten." The Hills worked with national organizations to include Susan's information in early missing persons databases. They consulted psychics, followed up on reported sightings, and maintained a dedicated phone line for tips. Their Christmas cards each year included Susan's photo and case details. mailed to hundreds of contacts across the country, a tradition they would maintain for decades. If you're finding this case as compelling as I do, hit that like button and share with someone who appreciates true crime investigations. Your engagement helps stories like Susan's reach more people, and sometimes that's exactly what it takes to uncover the truth that's been hiding for years. By spring 1983, the active investigation into Susan Hill's disappearance had slowed to a crawl. The dedicated task force disbanded, returning officers to regular duties. Detective Walsh maintained the case file, but new leads had dwindled to occasional calls that inevitably led nowhere. The bright red active label on Susan's file gradually faded to a dull pink, much like the community's once urgent hope for resolution. The years ticked by with cruel indifference. 1985 saw the case featured on an early episode of the television show Unsolved Mysteries, generating a brief flurry of tips but no breakthroughs. In 1990, the department's transition to computerized records prompted a review of all cold cases, with Walsh personally ensuring Susan's file was properly digitized and flagged for periodic review. Every 5 years, like clockwork, the case would resurface in local media. On the 10th anniversary, the Arizona Republic ran a feature titled The Librarian Who Vanished. On the 15th, a new detective temporarily inherited the file, interviewing witnesses again with fresh eyes but reaching the same dead ends. By the 20th anniversary in 2002, Susan's case had become something of a local legend, a story told to ASU freshmen as a warning about walking alone at night. The toll on Detective Walsh was evident to everyone in the department. He kept a copy of Susan's missing person flyer tucked in his desk drawer long after his promotion to captain. Colleagues noted how he would grow quiet whenever passing the library. When Walsh retired in 2007 after 40 years of service, he mentioned only one regret in his farewell speech. "I wish I could have brought Susan home." For Tempe residents, Susan's disappearance marked a dividing line. There was the carefree before and the cautious after. Her case became part of the city's dark history, alongside the rare floods and devastating fires that had shaped the community. Local history tours would pause outside the library, guides lowering their voices as they recounted the mystery of the librarian who walked into thin air one autumn evening, leaving nothing behind but questions that haunted the desert city for decades. When Susan Hill disappeared in 1982, DNA analysis was in its infancy. The technology that would eventually revolutionize criminal investigations was still confined to research laboratories, years away from practical application in police work. Investigators relied primarily on fingerprints, blood typing, and physical evidence comparison, tools that proved inadequate when a crime scene remained undiscovered. The decades following Susan's disappearance witnessed a forensic revolution. By the early 1990s, DNA profiling had entered courtrooms, though it required substantial biological material and weeks of laboratory work. The late 1990s brought PCR amplification, allowing for analysis of smaller samples. The early 2000s saw the development of mitochondrial DNA analysis, enabling identification from degraded samples. By 2010, touch DNA made it possible to generate profiles from just a few skin cells left on an object. This evolution transformed cold case investigations nationwide. Cases once considered unsolvable yielded to new technology. The capture of the Golden State Killer in 2018 using genetic genealogy, combining DNA evidence with public ancestry databases, marked a watershed moment for investigators everywhere. Suddenly, decades-old cases had new pathways to resolution. In January 2019, the Tempe Police Department established a dedicated cold case unit with Susan's disappearance among its priority cases. Detective Sofia Ramirez, a forensic specialist with the unit, began by examining what evidence remained from the original investigation. Susan's hairbrush and toothbrush had been preserved, providing reliable DNA samples. The single earring found near her route home was carefully re-examined using electron microscopy, revealing microscopic traces that had been impossible to detect with 1982 technology. Most significantly, the department still possessed 3 partial fingerprints lifted from the area where Susan was last seen. Though previously deemed insufficient for identification, modern algorithms could now enhance and analyze these fragmentary impressions. The team also re-examined fibers collected from the scene, now able to determine their exact composition and potential manufacturing origin. The Cold Case Unit submitted these materials to the FBI's revamped laboratory, along with samples to the private Othram Forensic Laboratory, which specialized in extracting DNA from degraded or minimal samples. The testing process would take months, with evidence moving through multiple specialized analyses, each representing scientific capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction to the original investigators in 1982. What's the weather like where you're watching? Here in Arizona, where this case unfolded, temperatures can reach extremes just like the emotions in this story. While we're waiting for those lab results to come back, drop a comment below about the conditions in your part of the world today. Is it hot enough to make you appreciate air conditioning like we do in Tempe, or are you bundled up watching this mystery unfold? On June 17, 2019, Detective Sofia Ramirez received an email that would change everything. The subject line read simply, "CODIS match, Hill, Susan, 1982. The combined DNA index system had found a match between the microscopic evidence preserved from Susan's case and a profile in the database. The match wasn't to a known criminal. It came through a familial DNA connection to a man who had submitted his DNA to a genealogy website years earlier. Working with genetic genealogists, the team constructed a family tree and narrowed their focus to a single individual, Robert Garrison, age 72. The name meant nothing to Ramirez initially. A background check revealed the stunning truth. Garrison had been a middle school principal in the Tempe school district from 1979 until his retirement in 2009. He still lived in Tempe, less than 2 miles from where Susan had disappeared. "I remember staring at my computer screen, unable to process what I was seeing," Ramirez later recalled in court testimony. "This wasn't some drifter passing through town. This was someone who had been part of the community for decades." The team pulled Garrison's employment records, driver's license photos from different decades, and began discreetly surveilling his current residence, a well-maintained ranch house in a quiet Tempe subdivision. The investigation revealed that in 1982 Garrison had lived just 3 blocks from Susan's walking route home. He had been 35 years old at the time of her disappearance, recently promoted to principal, and by all accounts, a respected educator. Further investigation uncovered that Garrison had actually participated in one of the community searches for Susan in October 1982. A newspaper photograph showed him among volunteers receiving instructions in the library parking lot. He had stood shoulder to shoulder with Susan's distraught parents, offering to distribute flyers in his school. For the next 3 weeks, investigators built their case meticulously. They collected Garrison's DNA from a discarded coffee cup at a local cafe, confirming the match. They interviewed former colleagues who mentioned his perfect attendance record and dedication to the community. They discovered he had served on the library board in the 1990s and had even donated to the Find Susan Hill Foundation's annual fundraiser multiple times. It was like watching a horror movie where the killer has been hiding in the background of every scene, Detective Ramirez told her supervisor. He didn't just hide from justice, he embedded himself in it. The most disturbing discovery came when investigators learned Garrison had attended Detective Walsh's retirement party in 2007, presenting him with a plaque on behalf of the school district, thanking him for his decades of service to Tempe. The man who had taken Susan had looked into the eyes of the detective hunting him and shaken his hand. On July 8, 2019, with the case built and evidence secured, the team prepared to make an arrest that would shatter the community's understanding of the past 4 decades. This revelation shocked everyone involved. If you're as stunned as I was, comment below with your reaction. How does it make you feel knowing that someone could live among a community for nearly 4 decades, respected and trusted, while harboring such a dark secret? Robert Garrison presented the perfect image of an educational leader. Standing at 6'1", with a full head of silver hair, dark brown in 1982, He carried himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. Former students described him as strict but fair, while parents and teachers praised his professional demeanor and commitment to academic excellence. His office at Sycamore Middle School featured neatly arranged awards, family photos, and thank you notes from former students, a carefully curated display of an exemplary life. Born in 1947 in Illinois, Garrison had moved to Arizona in the mid-1970s after earning his master's degree in educational administration. His personnel file contained glowing performance reviews, noting his exceptional organizational skills and ability to maintain discipline. He married his wife Eleanor in 1976, and they raised 2 daughters who both eventually left Arizona for careers in other states. Neighbors described the Garrisons as private but pleasant, known for their immaculate yard and regular attendance at community events. Garrison's reputation in Tempe was sterling. He served on multiple civic committees, including the Education Advisory Board and the Historic Preservation Commission. He attended the Methodist Church on Sundays, occasionally taught adult education classes there, and volunteered at the annual book fair that raised money for school libraries. Local newspaper archives contained dozens of photos of Garrison at ribbon cuttings, award ceremonies, and fundraisers. In 1998, he was named Educator of the Year by the Tempe Chamber of Commerce. How did such a visible community figure evade suspicion for nearly 4 decades? Investigators would later determine that Garrison had constructed his public persona with meticulous care. He maintained rigid routines and documented alibis. His position as a school principal provided him with built-in respectability that deflected scrutiny. When Susan's disappearance became news, he expressed appropriate concern without overplaying his reaction. He participated in search efforts at a level that demonstrated community spirit, without drawing attention. Perhaps most effectively, Garrison used his understanding of the investigation to stay one step ahead. As a member of various community organizations, he had regular, legitimate contact with law enforcement. He attended town halls where police shared updates on major cases. He knew which leads they were pursuing and which physical evidence they had recovered. This insider knowledge allowed him to adapt his behavior accordingly. His connections to the area where Susan disappeared were numerous but seemingly coincidental. His daily commute took him past the library. He occasionally attended events there. His role as principal put him in contact with librarians through educational partnerships. None of these connections appeared suspicious in isolation. They were the normal interactions of a community leader. The double life Garrison maintained required constant vigilance. Investigators would later discover a hidden compartment in his garage containing items that contradicted his carefully crafted image. A collection of newspaper clippings about Susan's case suggested an obsession with his own crime. A journal written in coded language revealed disturbing thoughts beneath his professional exterior. Most damning was a small jewelry box containing what appeared to be trophies from unknown victims, including Susan's missing earring that matched the one found near her walking route. Former colleagues interviewed after his arrest recalled subtle oddities that seemed insignificant at the time. Garrison occasionally disappeared during lunch breaks without explanation. He kept his office door locked even when stepping out briefly. He showed unusual interest in true crime books and documentaries. He reacted defensively when unexpected visitors arrived at his office. One secretary remembered him washing his hands almost compulsively after returning from unexplained absences. For 37 years, Robert Garrison walked through Tempe as a respected educator while concealing the truth about Susan Hill's fate. He attended memorial services for her, looked her parents in the eyes, and even counseled students who were troubled by the infamous unsolved case. His performance was so convincing that not even those closest to him suspected the darkness that lay beneath his carefully constructed façade. The arrest operation for Robert Garrison required meticulous planning. Detective Ramirez assembled a team of 12 officers, including tactical specialists and evidence technicians. They chose Tuesday, July 9, 2019, a day when Garrison typically visited his country club for morning golf. The team wanted to avoid a public confrontation or any possibility of him returning home where he might destroy evidence. At 6:42 a.m., As Garrison loaded golf clubs into his silver Lexus, 4 unmarked police vehicles quietly blocked his driveway. Detective Ramirez approached with 2 officers, their weapons holstered but accessible. "Mr. Garrison," she called out, "I'm Detective Ramirez with Tempe Police. We need to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation." Witnesses described how Garrison's demeanor transformed in an instant. The confident administrator seemed to physically shrink, his shoulders hunching forward as the color drained from his face. "Is this about Susan Hill?" he asked before Ramirez mentioned any details, a damning slip that investigators noted immediately. As officers secured him in handcuffs, Garrison maintained an eerie composure, asking practical questions about contacting his attorney and whether someone could move his car into the garage. This calculated response vanished only once, when he spotted the forensic team arriving with evidence collection kits. "You can't go in there," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "You need a warrant." Ramirez produced the search warrant, and Garrison's expression hardened into resignation. Neighbors emerged from nearby homes, watching in stunned silence as the respected retired principal was placed in a police vehicle. One neighbor of 20 years dropped her coffee mug on her driveway, where it shattered unnoticed as the patrol car pulled away. News of the arrest exploded through Tempe like a shockwave. By noon, local stations had interrupted regular programming with breaking news alerts. By evening, national networks had picked up the story. The headline, "Respected School Principal Arrested in 1982 Cold Case," appeared on screens across America, accompanied by side-by-side photos of Susan Hill and Robert Garrison. The community's response reflected collective trauma. Impromptu gatherings formed outside the library and police station. Former students of Garrison expressed disbelief and betrayal in emotional social media posts. Parents who had entrusted their children to his care questioned everything they thought they knew about him. The school district issued a statement expressing profound shock and deep concern, while establishing counseling services for anyone affected by the news. Perhaps most poignant was the reaction at the retirement community, where Detective Walsh, now 80, resided. When a nurse delivered the newspaper with Garrison's arrest on the front page, the former detective reportedly stared at the photo in silence for several minutes before whispering, "He was right there all along, right there in front of us." The search of Robert Garrison's home yielded evidence that transformed suspicion into certainty. In a hidden compartment behind a false wall in his garage workshop, investigators discovered a locked metal box containing items that directly connected him to Susan Hill. Most damning was a pair of round eyeglasses matching the prescription and style Susan wore in 1982, along with the second earring that matched the one found near her walking route decades earlier. Forensic technicians found microscopic blood traces on a hunting knife stored in the same container. Despite the passage of time, advanced DNA amplification techniques extracted a partial profile that matched Susan's DNA from her hairbrush. The statistical probability of the match occurring randomly was calculated at 1 in 87 billion, far exceeding the world's population. The DNA evidence extended beyond these items. Using techniques unavailable in 1982, analysts found Garrison's touch DNA on the strap of Susan's purse, which had been recovered during the original investigation, but yielded no usable evidence at that time. Additionally, a single hair found in Garrison's workshop matched Susan's mitochondrial DNA profile, placing her in a location she had no reason to visit during her lifetime. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of a journal hidden within a hollowed-out book in Garrison's study. Written in a simple substitution cipher that investigators quickly decoded, the journal contained detailed entries about stalking Susan for weeks before her disappearance. He had noted her schedule, her habits, even the route she took home. One entry, dated October 3, 1982, 2 days before the abduction, read, "She never varies her path, always predictable, tomorrow or the next day." As investigators pieced together evidence, a timeline emerged that answered questions that had haunted Tempe for nearly 4 decades. On October 5, 1982, Garrison had left school early, claiming a dentist appointment. He parked his car on a side street intersecting Susan's walking route. Security footage from the bank, reanalyzed with modern enhancement technology, showed his vehicle in the background, a detail missed in 1982. According to Garrison's own journal, he approached Susan asking for directions, then forced her into his vehicle using a knife. He took her to a remote area outside Tempe, where the crime was completed. He then buried her remains in the desert, a location he would eventually reveal as part of a plea agreement. The investigation uncovered that Garrison had returned to the search areas during community efforts, monitoring what was found and what was missed. He had volunteered to search sectors where he knew nothing would be discovered. Most calculating of all, he had attended the one-year memorial service for Susan, signing the guest book and offering condolences to her parents. Digital forensics revealed that Garrison had regularly searched online for updates about Susan's case over the years. He had created alerts for any news mentioning her name and had accessed the cold case section of the Tempe Police Department website dozens of times. In his final years before retirement, he had even written a school paper about famous unsolved mysteries in Arizona history, including the case he himself had created. What time is it where you're watching? It's never too late for justice, as this case proves. After 37 years, the truth finally emerged from the shadows. Drop a comment with your local time, a reminder that somewhere, someone is still waiting for answers in cases just like this one. The legal proceedings against Robert Garrison began in September 2019 with his arraignment in Maricopa County Superior Court. Dressed in a county-issued orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to his customary tailored suits, Garrison entered a not guilty plea, despite the mountain of evidence against him. Judge Maria Sanchez denied bail, citing both the severity of the charges and the potential flight risk. The prosecution, led by veteran District Attorney Eleanor Patel, built a methodical case that left little room for doubt. For 37 years, Robert Garrison walked among us as two different men, Patel told the jury in her opening statement. The respected educator everyone thought they knew, and the predator who took Susan Hill from her family and community. The state presented the DNA evidence, the journal entries, and testimony from forensic experts who established the timeline of Susan's final moments. The defense team, facing overwhelming physical evidence, pursued a strategy focusing on Garrison's mental state. They brought in psychiatric experts who testified about dissociative disorders and compartmentalized personalities. Their argument suggested that Garrison had effectively separated his criminal actions from his daily life through psychological mechanisms beyond his control. This strategy aimed not for acquittal, but for consideration of diminished capacity during sentencing. As the trial progressed, Garrison's demeanor remained unnervingly calm. He took notes during testimony, occasionally conferring with his attorneys, but showed little visible reaction to even the most damning evidence. This emotional detachment only reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of his calculated nature. After a 3-week trial and just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. At the sentencing hearing in December 2019, Judge Sanchez imposed the maximum penalty, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The passage of time, she stated, does not diminish the gravity of your actions nor the pain you have caused. Susan's family, now elderly but resolute, addressed the court before sentencing. Her sister Caroline spoke directly to Garrison. "You stole Susan from us, but you also stole 37 years of truth. While we searched and grieved and wondered, you coached students and attended community events as if you deserved to be among decent people." The community's reaction reflected both relief and collective trauma. The verdict brought closure, but also forced a painful re-evaluation of the past. Former students struggled to reconcile memories of their principal with his horrific actions. The school district established a memorial scholarship in Susan's name, while the library created a reading garden dedicated to her memory. Detective Walsh, who had followed the trial from his retirement home, told reporters simply, "Susan can rest now. And so can I." The resolution of Susan Hill's case fundamentally transformed Tempe. The community that had lived with an unsolved mystery for nearly 4 decades now grappled with an even more disturbing reality, that evil had hidden among them, wearing the face of respectability. Trust, particularly in authority figures, suffered a profound blow. Background check requests for school employees surged 300% in the months following the trial. Community forums on safety and vigilance became regular events. Susan's legacy extended far beyond the tragedy of her death. The Susan Hill Memorial Fund, established by her family, provides scholarships for library science students at Arizona State University. The Tempe Public Library expanded its true crime section, which now includes a special collection on cold cases and forensic advancement. Each October, the library hosts Justice for Susan events, focusing on literacy, community safety, and advances in forensic science. For Arizona law enforcement, the case revolutionized cold case methodology. The success in solving Susan's murder led to the creation of the Arizona Cold Case Consortium, which pools resources and expertise across jurisdictions. By 2023, this initiative had resolved 14 previously unsolvable cases using the DNA and investigative techniques pioneered in the Garrison investigation.